Epistemology is a branch of philosophy concerned with the nature and limits of knowledge. So if you have questions of the type, how do I know what I know? How much can I know? These are epistemic questions. Metaphysics is a branch of philosophy concerned with the nature of reality. These are more so questions of the form, what is blank? So if you ask something like, what is moral goodness? Well, then that's definitely a metaphysical question. You're asking what the property of moral goodness really is like. So is it a socially constructed property? Did we collectively make it up? Is it an individually constructed property? Do we each have our own moral goodness, and that's true for us? So those are metaphysical questions. It should be clear that epistemic and metaphysical questions sometimes overlap. So let's go over this a little bit. A quintessential question in epistemology is, how do we come to know which statements are true? A related metaphysical question is, what is truth? Again, that is a dead giveaway, the form, what is blank, that this is a metaphysical question. But you know that the notion of truth is related to knowledge in general. So here is definitely some overlap between these two branches of philosophy. However, notice that the first question, how do we come to know which statements are true, is equivalent to asking what the right method for acquiring true beliefs is, not what truth itself is. So we need to be really clear about this. The question, how do we come to know which statements are true? It's essentially about belief-forming practices. It really is about what's a sort of checklist that I should follow to make sure that my beliefs are actually true. That would be the epistemic question. How do we come to know which statements are true? Then, we can summarize, is a question about what the best belief-forming practices are. What is truth, on the other hand, is asking about what all true statements have in common. This metaphysical question, it kind of grasps at something beyond belief-forming practices. When we ask what is truth, we really want to know, what do all true statements have in common? We might need to know also, what do all false statements have in common, or what do all false statements lack that true statements do have? So it's a strange question, as metaphysical questions tend to be. But what's really important here is that we distinguish that these are separate questions. The first about belief-forming practices, how you should form beliefs, ideally speaking. And the second about what true beliefs all have in common. So clearly there is overlap here between the two branches, but we just need to make sure we're clear on this. They're not the same question. Another question where there is overlap between the two branches is, what is knowledge? So this is a question we'll be covering at length in this course, although we'll speak more about that a little bit later. Richard DeWitt, in his excellent, I would say, Introduction to the History and Philosophy of Science, reminds us that we tend to take epistemic matters for granted, not putting much thought into them. For example, he notes that even his dictionary is guilty of circular reasoning when it comes to defining epistemic concepts. So I'll go over his example from his dictionary in a second, but it really is perplexing that we take notions of truth for granted. For example, the notion of truth we take for granted. We go to school, we spend time reading books, we spend money on books and school, and yet we don't really put much thought into what the word truth really represents. We think we're after truth when we are reading non-fiction books and going to school and all that, but we kind of don't put much effort into trying to figure out what truth itself really means. So DeWitt gives kind of a funny example, so let me move on to that one. Let's just say you like to speak to your dictionary for some reason. You go up to it, what is truth? And you search in there, and its definition, potential answer here, something like, oh, it's just facts. Truth is facts. Things we know are facts. Okay, well then you flip around a little bit and you try to figure out what's a fact then. Well, apparently DeWitt's dictionary says, well, a fact is a thing that is true. So clearly this is defining one concept in terms of the other and vice versa. And that kind of circular reasoning is not at all okay. I hope you're with me on this one. Circular reasoning is not good. You'll learn more about that in the informal fallacy of the day below. So clearly we need to do better than that. And it actually might be worse when it comes to the concept of knowledge. I have asked people, what do you think knowledge is? And the response is even more circular than the distinction between facts and truth. People often define knowledge as, well, things that I know. That's not even defining a term in relation to another term. It's literally defining the term in relation to itself. So that is the worst kind of circularity. So let's do better than that. Here is a possible definition of knowledge, the JTB theory of knowledge. I'll tell you why it's called JTB in a second. But this is a historically important definition of knowledge that we need to cover. So let's get into this. A subject, let's call the subject S, knows a proposition, let's call the proposition P, if and only if 1. P is true. 2. S believes that P. And 3. S is justified in believing that P. So this is probably a really overly technical way of expressing a pretty simple concept. In other words, knowledge is justified true belief. Now, epistemic philosophers tend to make their definitions as strict, as rigorous as possible, but essentially it's just this, justified true belief, and as you can tell, that's also where the name JTB theory comes from. J, justified, T, true, B, belief. So that is the theory. By the way, this theory goes all the way back to Plato. So this is in fact Plato's theory, although many people have subscribed to this view throughout time. We'll get into more contemporary views on this notion much later. But all you need to know now is historically important, coming from Plato, JTB theory. Okay. By the way, there is a little section at the end of the lesson called Related Material, and you can learn a little bit about this painting. This is the Death of Socrates, and there at the foot of the bed, and people don't often know which one Plato is. Plato is there at the foot of the bed. There he is. So we're going to look at his theory now. Okay. Let's pretend we're talking to Lisa Simpson, if you are not familiar with this image. And let's ask her a question. It might be a strange question to ask someone, but nonetheless, we're going to ask it. What do you know? So we ask Lisa, what do you know? And being a smart and studious girl, she responds, I know that a neutral carbon atom has 4 valence electrons. Okay, if we want to test this claim, this knowledge claim, what we can do using the JTB theory is more or less set up criteria to check if this is in fact knowledge. So the first thing we do is we identify the subject. That's pretty easy. It's the I in the sentence, and it represents Lisa. And then the proposition. So the proposition, just so we're clear on this, that's the part that can be either true or false. So a neutral carbon atom has 4 valence electrons. That is, well, it's a thought, certainly, behind a declarative sentence, as we see here. But it can be either true or false. Some other sentences that we say can't be either true or false. So if I say something like, "Yay, Lakers," it would be really weird to respond to that true. That's just not what the label true applies to. Same thing with a question. If I were to ask you, "What time does the store close?" And if you were to say false, that'd be slightly strange. It'd be confusing. It'd be a misapplication of the label false. So true and false seem to be labels that apply only to declarative sentences. Like this one, a neutral carbon atom has 4 valence electrons. Either that's true or it's false. Some of you remember your chemistry class and you already know the answer. I'll let you know what it is in a second. But for now, let's just be clear. That is the proposition. So we're wondering if Lisa actually knows that. When she claims that she knows it, is she claiming that she knows something that's actually true? So all of that was a long roundabout way of saying that we're going to create a checklist using the JTB criteria to see if Lisa actually has knowledge. Okay, so the first question is P true? Is it actually the case that a neutral carbon atom has 4 valence electrons? Well, the answer is yes. That is in fact the case. You may consult your chemistry textbooks if you feel like it, or just take my word for it. Okay, moving on. Does S, the subject, Lisa, actually believe P? Well, we can be relatively confident, given the context of the conversation, that she said it because she actually believes it. So this is kind of a judgment call here, but we're guessing she's not lying to us and she didn't just randomly spit out this sentence. She must in fact believe it because we asked her, "Hey, what do you know?" So we'll say yes, Lisa does believe this proposition. And lastly, is S justified in believing P? Does she have good reason for this? So if we know anything about Lisa, we are compelled to say, yeah, she has good reason for this. Maybe she got it from a teacher, a reliable teacher, or she read it from a textbook. In any case, we know that Lisa in general has reliable belief-forming practices. She doesn't just, throw darts at a board for, information. She goes out and studies. So we're going to go ahead and say she is justified in believing this proposition, which means she met all the criteria. This is in fact knowledge. She knows this. So that's what we mean when we say that someone has knowledge. They have a belief that's true and it's justified. It's a belief, it's true, and it's justified. That's the JTB theory of knowledge. Okay. Let's now look at another example. In this case, we will look at Mr. Bart Simpson, who is Lisa's brother. If you know a little bit about the character of Bart, he is not exactly the studious type. So, let's just say that Bart is taking a test, and conveniently for us, it is phrased in this way. I know that, and you have 4 options. Now, if you don't know the answer, I know that people typically think to themselves they should just pick C. That is, in fact, what Bart did in this case. And interestingly, the result is that he more or less said this: I know that a neutral carbon atom has 4 valence electrons. How very, very convenient for us, because we can take this to be a knowledge claim. And as such, we can run it through the JTB filter. So here is the same setup as the previous example. And now let's see if Bart actually has knowledge here. Okay, is P true? Well, it certainly still is true. It doesn't stop being true just because Bart says it. So that's still a check. Does S actually believe P? Probably not. I mean, he did just pick randomly. We might even be relatively confident that he doesn't even remember what he picked. So it's hard to say, it's hard to call that a belief. We're going to go ahead and say no to that one. Lastly, is S justified in believing P? Well, randomly picking C is not a reliable belief-forming practice. That is not how you want to go about your life, picking out beliefs in that way. So we're going to go ahead and say no to that one as well. There it is. Only one of the criteria is met, which means this is not knowledge. I hope that makes sense. You definitely don't want to say that Bart knows that a neutral carbon atom has 4 valence electrons. So you wouldn't call that knowledge. And that's how the theory works. Very simple. Okay. So there is something really intuitive about the JTB theory of knowledge. And it was, again, historically speaking, maybe one of the most important theories of knowledge that ever existed. Not everyone is on board, though, now and then. So we have one more term here to go over. And it's kind of a long one. But the basic idea is simple: skepticism. It's a philosophical view that can include any of the following theses. Now, we're going to cover each one of these theses for each unit of this course, actually. Skepticism will be our perennial bad guy. It'll be the recurring opponent that we have to face off. So here is the general outlook of skepticism. It could be either that no knowledge claim is fully justifiable, or that for any thesis, there is another thesis with equal probability of being true, so that it is impossible to know which is a true thesis. Sometimes this is called a defeater. So you say, well, it could be what you say, or it could be this other thing. And we can't tell which one it is, which means we don't know. That is another form of skepticism. And of course, it could also be this: that knowledge of some particular subject, whether it be, I don't know, whether or not God actually exists, or whether or not we can ever know with a certainty that we're not, for example, in a simulation. Those could all be kind of more narrow skepticisms, a skepticism about a particular subject. So I got this definition from chapter 1 of the Oxford Handbook of Skepticism. And in another article, I did notice that there's actually an extreme form of skepticism where it's basically the conjunction of all these three views. Basically, you take all of these together and you can call yourself a super skeptic if you'd like to. In any case, that is my general resource for anything having to do with skepticism. It's Greco, he's the editor, and it's 2008. I think there might be a new edition, but this is my copy at least. So anytime that I mention skepticism, I'm probably getting it from this book. Okay, I'll tell you if not. All right, let's do the recap here. First of all, epistemology is a branch of philosophy concerning matters of knowledge. One epistemic question is, what is knowledge? It's not the only one. Epistemic philosophers concern themselves with all sorts of questions regarding knowledge. This is just the one that we'll be covering. Plato's JTB theory is a historically important potential answer to the aforementioned question. It's not the only answer. In fact, we just saw the skeptics who say, yeah, knowledge is impossible, so no matter how you define it, it's just not going to happen. But in any case, Plato's JTB theory is a pretty important potential solution to that question. And last but not least, the skeptics do not believe that knowledge is possible. These skeptics, they were around in ancient Greece. They are around today. Although today, epistemology is sort of more like a game that epistemic philosophers play. They try to solve puzzles about knowledge. So they certainly take it a little less seriously than they did in ancient Greece. I shouldn't say it quite so nonchalantly in that way. The basic idea is there's no real threat of skepticism. Most people agree today, whereas in ancient Greece, they were concerned about it. So that is what we should say about the skeptics. I haven't mentioned that, of course, they give arguments for their view. They don't just say, oh yeah, knowledge is impossible. They give arguments for that claim. And we are going to cover one such argument right now. It's called the regress argument, and that will be seen below. The regress argument is not the only argument that skeptics can brandish, but it is the one that we'll cover, and we will do that now.